I think we're going to get started. Maybe a few people will drag themselves in, but thank you all for coming. Problem with the auditorium is if you don't have a huge crowd, then it makes it worse, but it looks good. Anyway, I appreciate everybody coming. We're going to get started. I want to, where's the lights? I want to introduce Dean Michael Nearing, wherever he is, who's going to welcome everybody from the college. By the way, I think everybody knows me. I'm Ron Weisberger. I'm the director of the Holocaust and Genocide Center here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending the very first event of the spring semester for the Holocaust and Genocide Center. My name is Michael Nestor. I'm the Dean of the School of Languages, Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And today, it gives me and Bristol Community College great pleasure to welcome internationally acclaimed pianist Carolyn Enger. There you are. Who in her presentation entitled The Mischlinge Expose will use music to address universally significant issues of identity and inclusion, encouraging empathy, tolerance, and engagement. I hope in just a few minutes that you will give her a very warm round of applause to introduce her, but first, let's find out a little bit more about her. So Raquel, if you will come in and present some information. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Today we have the pleasure of listening to an amazing artist, internationally celebrated American pianist Carolyn Enger. She's gained critical acclaim for her exquisite lyrical playing, and the piece that she's going to perform today is specifically interesting. The Mischlinge Expose, in case you don't know what a Mischlinge is a person who is not 100% Aryan. This was a term that was made during the Hitler regime. Carolyn's article, The Mischlinge Expose, Stories of Assimilation and Conversation, was recently published in the book Women Defying Hitler, Rescue and Resistance Under the Nazis, published by Bloomsburg Academic. She's dedicated to bringing music to diverse audiences in accessible civic spaces. And Ms. Enger studied at the Manhattan School of Music and is a Steinway artist. So everybody join me in welcoming Carolyn.
Thank you so much for your warm welcome here. It's great to see my friends, and thank you for coming. It's a little bit of a reunion for a few of us. We were on the trip to Auschwitz last year with the Association of Holocaust Organizations, so it's very meaningful for me to be back here at Bristol. And I'm glad that this afternoon is being recorded so that it can be part of your resource material for your center. So to give you a little bit of a background, on September 15th, 1935, the Nazis enacted two race laws, the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. These laws defined and discriminated against numerous groups in the Nazi regime, including the Mischlinge, a derogatory term for those neither fully Jewish nor fully Aryan in the view of the Nazis. On January 20th, 1942, in Wannsee, Germany, a conference was held to work out plans for the destruction of the Jewish people. Among the things that were discussed at this conference was who was to be considered a Jew and where and how the Jews were to be annihilated. The problem that the Nazi Party came against was that there were many people who had, there was a lot of intermarriage, and so even members in the Nazi Party had probably family members who may not have been, in a sense, purely Aryan. And it went against somehow their sensibilities to then do harm to anyone who had some kind of, partial Aryan racial makeup. But eventually they decided that the Mischlinge, the half-Jews, were to be put into forced labor camps and eventually annihilated. The story of my own Mischling identity starts with my grandmother, Charlotte Popelauer. Born Jewish, she converted to Christianity after marrying my grandfather. She passed away before the war when my father was almost 7. And because of her Jewish heritage, then my father was labeled a Mischling grade A. My father was at first drafted into the army, but was eventually kicked out. And after he was kicked out, he faked a limp with a cane so his neighbors would not be suspicious of him not fighting in the army. He became an apprentice in textile and commercial art and worked on blueprints during the war. And then in 1944, when the Nazis began to follow through with their plans for anyone who was a Mischling, my father was sent to a forced labor camp, Gross Rosen. And he was in a variety of subcamps of Gross Rosen as well, Ostlinde, Schmiegrode, and a few others. There, he dug ditches to fortify the area against Russian tanks. Even though they dug these ditches, when the Russian tanks came, of course, they drove right over these ditches, so he felt that it was really useless work. When they could hear the guards, the tanks coming. I guess it must have been in probably January of 45. The guards then, of course, fled the camp, and then the prisoners followed. You'll hear my father's description of his escape. He made his way down after the war he kept having to move further west, and he made his way with his first wife, Ursula, to Augsburg, and he started a commercial art business. So you'll see some of his drawings. One of his major commissions was to draw the 12 Stations of the Cross. Augsburg in Germany is a very Catholic area. And so his drawings were not out of religious conviction, but rather that he was commissioned. It was a commercial enterprise. I'm going to jump ahead. He very much wanted to leave Germany and eventually was sponsored by the United Church World Services to come to the United States. And once he came to the United States, his first marriage ended a few years later, ended in divorce, and then he met my mother, a Presbyterian from Philadelphia. So I was baptized and raised as a Christian. My godparents, you'll meet my godmother initially in the film, my godmother was a Mischling grade A, and my godfather was a German Jew. So this, what I wanted to explore here is that there's a kind of all this mixing of identity and I don't know if I want to say fluidity about it, but there wasn't necessarily strong, in a sense, as we think of here in the United States, this strong kind of religious conviction. It was a little bit more identity related and socially related. I would say that, we have separation of church and state here, whereas in Europe that does not exist. So it kind of influenced the players here in the film, the composers and artists, and it also, I would say, influenced my family as well. So my godmother became a member of the Protestant church in Tenafly, as an example, because she liked the music. She liked singing in the choir. So again, not really out of any kind of burning religious desire. So fast forward, his father passed away, and when my father came back from Germany after attending my grandfather's funeral, he came back with a notebook filled with documents, all family documents, you'll see them in the film, all with many from that period, stamped with the Nazi insignia. And I felt kind of very curious and afraid and very, very curious, because he didn't speak about his experiences during the war. And so it was kind of a learned silence in our household, that the loudest thing in the room was the thing that wasn't being spoken about. So as to my own journey to Judaism, it started, I was at Vassar College initially and didn't like the piano teacher that they had assigned to me. So my high school piano teacher landed a position at Malloy College on Long Island. So I transferred from Vassar to Malloy in order to stay with my piano teacher. And it's a Catholic college, university now. Part of the core curriculum, 9 credits of theology, and one of the classes I took was an intro to Judaism. And from that point on, I identified myself Jewishly and then went through 2 different conversions, a Reform conversion, and at some point someone said, well, but you're not really Jewish with that. So, which of course I am not in agreement with. But then I went through an Orthodox conversion as well. And so I wanted to be able to have a one-word answer in terms of when somebody asked me, well, what are you? I'd have to go into this whole long explanation about my grandmother converting and my father and forced labor and blah, blah, blah. And instead now I can just say I'm Jewish. If you want to know more, I don't know, ask my husband. So I've been reading and pursuing this topic of the Holocaust and the Mischlinge for over 30 years, and I began to focus on the importance of speaking out about diversity, tolerance, and identity. As a musician, I feel the importance of being able to use my medium as a vehicle for spreading the message of social justice. With this project, combining my family's story with composers and artists who themselves were judged based on their Jewish identity, I hope to shed light on the terrible consequences of othering, racism, and anti-Semitism. And with this, I hope to convey a positive message empowering people with pride and confidence, without shame or pressure to hide, acceptance both internal and external. I hope ultimately that it's about peace between us. Thank you.
Can you define the word Mischling?
A Mischling, Mischling is a Mischling. It's a German word for a Mischling. You are of mixed race, but it's evenly distributed between 2 grandparents being Jewish and 2 grandparents being Aryans. So that was the denomination that they gave us. Half Aryans, half Jews. It was a term that was interchangeable, because since Hitler was not interested in the religion of the people, but he considered the Jews an undesirable race. And as far as he was concerned, everybody who descended from Jews, even partially, was undesirable and was not expected to pass on any Jewish blood. Questionnaires were always asking, what's the religion of your grandparents? It never said, what's your religion? That was unimportant. What's the religion of your grandparents? And that automatically branded you as a half-Jew if you said 2 are Jewish.
This is Breslau, where my father and my godmother grew up before the war. It is now Wrocław, part of Poland. Many families like the Mendelssohns and my father's, converts who now identified as Christian, found both their lives and their identities disrupted as the Nazis rose to power. Moses Mendelssohn's own descendant, Franz Mendelssohn, joined the Nazi Party while still refusing to renounce the Mendelssohn family name. His daughter said, "I'm proud of the name, but I always had to explain our situation to the authorities. I would often get asked, 'Do you descend from that horrible Jew?'
What was interesting about that family and about a lot of other families in Germany in those days was that the generation of my grandfather were very much assimilated to being German first and Jewish second.
A lot of people, when they talk about the Holocaust, they talk about the Auschwitz, they talk about the concentration camp, they talk about the gas chambers, they talk about mistreatment of Jews, and so forth. But when you tell them about the story of the Mischlinge, they pop out their eyes and they don't know what we have in mind. But this is, Mischlinge is something that bedeviled the Nazis themselves. They didn't even they didn't know how to handle that. But they thought it was of the greatest importance for them to solve the problem of Mischlinge. So what's the word Mischlinge? It's a German word. It's no longer used. It's no longer employed. If you check a German dictionary today, I doubt whether you'll find the word itself. It's a Nazi word, which implies people who are mixed half-breeds. They're not this and they're not that. Now, what do I mean by that? The Nazis divided the human races genetically by blood, based on racial theories which were common in those days. And the other thing that the Nazis did, they intertwined this racial thinking with this demonic anti-Semitism that was already there, that saw the Jews as being not only that they are stubborn and they don't want to mix actually, or they don't want to convert to the mainstream religion, but they are conniving and they're basically evil. There's something evil about the Jews, but since they are few and since they know that there's something wrong with them, then they're making all the kinds of efforts to get over that by controlling the superior races. Conspiracies like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Okay, the Jews want to dominate the world. How do they do that? Several ways. One way is by getting their hands on the financial markets of the world, by controlling the money. Number two is by causing the nations of the world to go to war with each other and by financing these wars, because without money you cannot go to war. And number three is, since their blood is contaminated, is bad, then they try to marry with Aryans in order, it's like a medicine, it's like an injection, in order to better their blood contents. And that is dangerous because that causes a bastardization, that's the term that they use, a bastardization of their offspring. So what we have to do, they said, the Nazis, is first of all, we have to remove the Jews from our midst, if we can, and prevent the Jews from having any kind of sexual relations with Aryans, okay? From Jews from contaminating the pure Aryan blood. So they went one step of the Nuremberg laws of 1935, which forbade marriage between Jews and non-Jews and forbade Jews from having sexual relations with members of the Aryan race. The Aryans are the Germans, the Scandinavians, and the Dutch. They were considered as part of the Aryan family. All right, so they were satisfied with this, and then they realized they got a bigger problem on their hand, because before Hitler came to power, there was a lot of assimilation in Germany. And thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews had intermarried with non-Jews. Some of them intermarried and they remained Jews. Some of them intermarried and they converted out. So there were tens of thousands of Jews who had converted. They were baptized and they go to church. Some of them were ministers, but they were born Jewish. So the Nazis, this was no problem to them. They decided anyone who was born Jewish, as far as we're concerned, he's a Jew. We don't care if he practices any other religion. We don't care if he's a priest or that. He's a Jew and he can practice any kind of religion. How do we define a Jew? And the answer was, but anyone, we were going by their grandparents. Anyone who had 4 Jewish known grandparents, whether religious practicing or not, whether they were registered with the Jewish community or not, but they were known. Anyone who has 4 known Jewish grandparents is a Jew, period. Then they took it a step further. Anyone who has 3 known Jewish grandparents, 3, that too is a Jew, period. Nothing can be done about it. The big problem was, if a person has 2 Jewish grandparents and 2 Aryan grandparents, or if a person has 1 Jewish grandparents but 3 Aryan grandparents, then this is what they did. A person who has 2 and 2, he is a Mischling grade A. Grade A, he's 50-50. A person who has 3 Aryan grandparents and 1 Jewish grandparent, he's a Mischling grade B. Now, most of these Mischling people were not practicing Jews. Some of them didn't even know that they had Jewish blood in them, especially someone who had 1 Jewish grandparent and 3 non-Jewish grandparents. He may have been baptized in the church. He may not even have known that he has one of his grandparents was Jewish.
We are on the list, you know. Maybe 3 months, 6 months, 8 months. Our day was coming.
Right.
That's 100%. It was a law.
These laws were passed gradually. They were passed for the Jews in 1933. For the Mischlinge, they appeared in 1940. At that time, the half-Jews, the Mischlinge, had been drafted into the army when the war had started in 1939. And my brother, who was there together with a friend from Bristol, who was a non-Aryan, not a half-Aryan, but a non-Aryan. So he fled over the Pyrenees to Spain, and from Spain he went to England and saved his life this way. My brother did not dare do that. He wanted to. But since he thought and he knew that he was supposed to go into the army, he was afraid that Hitler, or the Nazis, would take it out on his family if he, as a German potential soldier, is fleeing into another country and is not coming back. So he came back. And they had just passed another law. If there was a new law, they didn't want them anymore, so they sent them back, and they did not draft any new ones. But it was a slow degradation of the lifestyle. It was going from worse to worse.
Her brother had contracted tuberculosis in an internment camp in France and recovered well in a sanatorium in Germany. He was on his way to a summer hotel job near the Swiss border, but he disappeared en route. They reported him missing.
The trains were regularly raided by the military and the Gestapo. So one of the two, I'm not sure which, probably the Gestapo, saw his military pass that he had, which identified him as a half-Jew. He was a tall, blonde guy and stuck out in those days, in 43, like a sore thumb, not being in uniform and fighting for his fatherland. So somebody didn't like that, took him out of the train.
He was passed from Gestapo prison to Gestapo prison until they anonymously received a phone call that he was in Breslau. Each of them, including her non-Aryan mother, went to the prison to petition for his release. Finally, one officer told Rosemary that if she came back the next week, he might have some information.
And then he looked in his files and he said, "Your brother has been shipped to Auschwitz." So I immediately got in touch with my parents, and my father got on the train to go to Auschwitz and rescue his son. Well, he never got to Auschwitz, of course. I mean, they didn't allow tourists or regular persons to get there. So he came back, and then we got a letter from my brother. He was allowed to write. We have 2 letters from Auschwitz. And in the last one that was dated the 4th of July, he did not write the letter himself. It was written in some other's handwriting, but he signed it. And it said, the news about John, or some other name, about his TB breaking out again is very sad, and I hope that he will recover. And we, of course, knew that he was talking about himself. And then several weeks later, my father was ordered to the Gestapo in Breslau and was handed a death certificate that was dated the 8th of July. So he died on the 8th of July, supposedly.
While we worked very hard and also had a limited amount of food, our spirits were relatively good because of the radio reception we had, and we saw that the end of the war is near. When the Russians were as close so that we could hear the cannons, our guards as well as we decided to move further west, and our guards put us into a heavily wired prison camp, and we thought we were caught in a bad position. We tested the wires and the barbed fences and found out they were not electrified, so we slept the night there and then went as a group further west. By that time we walked through forests and heavy snow, and it was physically very draining after the hard work at the camp to keep on marching through the snow.
And anyway, I went onto a freight car and I collapsed For 3 days I was on the freight car, and I don't know anything what happened there. Anyway, it wound up to be to go to Vienna, around Czechoslovakia. When the Russians came again, so we all found a bicycle each, 4 bicycles, and a little cart about that size, for all our things on top there, including a typewriter. We needed a typewriter, obviously we needed a typewriter. And with the typewriter, we got some paper, because it was still Nazi time, you see. So we always typed a letter that we were on our way on an important mission, and we needed food stamps. So we went to all those village burgermeisters or mayors, and we got food stamps, and then we could eat. Right? And when we went as far as Kaufbeuren in Allgäu, and that's where we knew the Americans would come.
Zemlinsky's father was raised Catholic, his maternal grandmother was Muslim, and when he was young, his entire family converted to the religion of his maternal grandfather, Judaism. Zemlinsky converted to Protestantism in 1899. His Turnwachterlied, written that year, featured allusions to the cross and text from Psalms. More than colleagues, Zemlinsky and Schoenberg were actually brothers-in-law. Schoenberg was married to Zemlinsky's sister. What inspired me to create this project? This gathering of materials and experiences to explore this issue of identity and conversion comes from a personal story, my family history, and my own story. I hope to inspire my audience to think of these things for themselves in their own families, in their own interior lives. What does it mean to be who we are? How can we see each other in a more compassionate light and not look for binding definitions of each other, but rather opening up and seeing that we're many combinations of many things. That gives us a lot of freedom to explore ourselves and to have greater and deeper understanding for other people. Ultimately, I want to erase lines that divide us and inspire people to feel at peace within ourselves and with each other. Might be some questions, and I can't see you, so. Yes, I can hear you, yes. Yes. Yes, yes, and I would say that that carried through his entire life. I think he probably felt nice and safe and secure when he married my mother, because her family, parts of her family have been in this country since pre-revolutionary time. So, but when I was going through my conversions, every time I spoke with him, no matter what the topic, dinner plans, going to a play or whatever, somewhere in the conversation, I could feel that the shoe was going to drop, and that he would then tell me, don't convert. And so I said, well, what's the difference to you whether I go to a place on a Saturday or a Sunday? And he said, well, then don't be on any list and don't join. So he was very much afraid that, this could all happen again. And I grew up in a very safe way and had no fear of anything. And then when the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, with that shooting, massacre really, I then thought, oh my goodness, he was right. Until then, that was kind of like the explosion, right, of that it could then touch us here. We had beforehand, we didn't really, I don't know that there were certain anti-Semitism, but not a killing like that. So anyway, I think that he was always sort of wanted to be under the radar, and it's funny because he didn't really express, he did, I was going to Sunday school, right, as a child, but he wasn't going to church with my mom. He felt that all religions were political, which I guess one could understand coming from where he did. And then there was a time when, I guess the Goldhagen book of Hitler's willing executioners, right? So my brother, Goldhagen was at the Harvard Club in New York, and my brother took my father to the talk. And at the Q&A time, my father got up and said, I am a Jew. And when my brother retold this to me, we were like, what? He said that? In public? So it was something that kind of, and I think he probably wanted to counter. He was using that as a way of saying somehow that he could then say something counter to what Goldhagen may have written, whatever. That wasn't the point. The fact that he was actually able to stand up and say something like that. So yeah, he was, I would say that that's kind of a learned behavior. If you see at the age of, I don't know, starting around 10 years old or so, he was born in 1921, so in the early 30s and all, and somehow this kind of, on the streets and the signage and then 38, of course, Kristallnacht, and better stay under the radar for lots of reasons, and especially coming out of, his mixed identity, because, he had blue eyes, and so I guess, the physical attributes can kind of pass in a way, and kind of walk past that Gestapo guy or something and not be noticed. Think about that, living with that kind of fear and stress. So I like your question. Thank you. Any others? Oh, yeah, sure. Hi. Great. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm honored. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Wow. Wow, of course. My cards are out there on the, just call me or write to me, either way. I'm very, very touched, because actually when we kind of, flip back a few pages in this book around racism and identity and this kind of pure race and this awful fake science of eugenics, Hitler saw the example here in this country. He didn't necessarily dream this up. It's not just coming out of where he was. He saw what was going on here. The United States had miscegenation laws for quite some time and the Jim Crow laws, and he saw that, you know, people in the United States weren't necessarily up in arms about it. And so he adopted it for his own purposes, which were, I mean, any time that there's any kind of othering going on, we're in a dangerous space, each and every one of us, whether it's we who are being othered or someone else. And that's, in a sense, why a few things motivated me to create this project. One is to kind of, not very many people know about the Mischlinge. My father wanted to tell his story, but somehow or another was too, I don't know, like tied up inside himself to be able to put it all down. And then, issues around identity and, you know, and also to sort of counter this idea of a pure race, because anytime we're looking for something pure, it's an ideal that can't be met. I want pure performances of every note being exactly right. You know, for the most part, they are, but sometimes not. Anytime we're looking for some kind of purity, it's a dangerous space because it's just not. I don't think it's really humanly possible. We have moments, but and especially when it comes to kind of referring to other people and then somehow we're this and they're that. It's a dangerous space for all of us. So, anyway, I don't want to be a sort of a message of doom because, but it's hard. I don't know. It's very, very challenging, and I think that that's kind of why we're all here gathered, is because we're all wrestling with these issues, and you know, it's funny because when I created the film and was then looking for places to share it. The tagline was, well, especially needed now. And I figured that I would outgrow that. And that, you know, and so when's that now that where it's not especially needed is what I'm looking for. So, and I do have a positive message because I feel that, you know, I want to empower us to feel comfortable within our own skin and who we are. I mean, because when we're comfortable in our own skin, we can share more positive messages and be kind to each other. I don't know. Some psychologists must know that if we feel good about ourselves, we treat others well. Something like that. I hope that's an equation that still works. So, were you going to ask me something? Yes, hi. A 100%. Mm-hmm. Well, it's tolerated, accepted, able to get a position, you know, teaching at a university or as a conductor of an orchestra or so. And if the ticket in is to rid oneself of one's identity and you know, go through this formalized process of converting, and then. But then, you know, with Heinrich Heine, he converted, and then he didn't get the position because, after all, he was a convert. So it's like, no, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But, I mean, just similarly to, I mean, I could really feel it with my father also, that kind of wanting to be, I mean, it's true for, it's understandable to want to be part of the majority because, in a sense, there are more perks. To take away physical harm, take away, I don't know, and then let's say maybe add more resources or something. I mean, if we go even back into, in the early days of our humanity, the larger groups are going to have better shelter, better food. So it's, that's an understandable motivation to be part of a larger group. But not all of us fit into larger groups, and we have our identities. And if we're, in terms of our heritage, and it's a kind of a puzzle about Judaism because one is it's a religion. It's hard to kind of pin it down because it's a faith, it's a religion, it's also a tribe in a way, because one can be born to a Jewish mother and be Jewish and have nothing to do with, I believe, such and such. So, it's a family, it's a faith, and there are, the tenets of the faith kind of then create a little bit of this outsiderness because of, I don't know, if we're eating kosher food, then that I won't be eating here, I'll be eating there. If we need to be part of a community in order to pray together, then we might not necessarily be praying with you, and our prayers are a little different. So it's, I don't know. There's no way for humans to be homogenized, and it's just, it goes against our individuality and look at how large the world is, how many different groups there are, and belief systems that are created around, I don't know, the puzzles of the universe. Like, what are we doing here? Why do we die? We're all wrestling with that on some level, I think. Hi. Great. Okay, so he was a bit of a puzzle to me because he didn't talk a lot about his experiences, but yet we knew that there was something there. And so, in a sense, what I created here was an attempt to get closer to him in some way. And so I would say when I was very young, I guess the general economy was kind of pretty comfortable in the 60s or so. And he was, very, very, very hardworking, very, very hardworking, as many immigrants are. And then, I don't know, I guess when I was in my teens, I don't know if it was external pressures or he seemed kind of like angry and depressed to me. And I would say that his religion was really his children. He was every ounce of anything that he did, felt, thought, anything was always geared to us. I'm one of 5, so it's a big undertaking to raise 5 kids. So, and with an accent and with kind of, different ways of being. He was very formal. I would say, I love you. As an adult, I would, in his later years, and he would say, thank you. And so it's, there's no hug there. And I got, it was a handshake. So it's very German. So and I don't think he wanted me necessarily. When I first started exploring all this, he was pretty upset with me because I think I may have been like poking around and revealing things about him and us. And it may have been that he was sensitive to my mother. Maybe here I am dragging up the first wife. I don't know if that was some kind of a sensitivity for him. But at this point, I would say that he would probably be very proud to see this and to kind of, I don't know, that his story is out there, because I think he was very frustrated on a lot of different levels. He was also kind of funny. So it's, I mean, we're all mixed bags. So, but I had a hard time, I would say, trying to figure him out. I walked around on eggshells a little bit around him, because I never knew, let's say, for example, I had this huge curiosity with this notebook coming back from Germany with all these documents. And of course I had a gazillion questions, but had learned that this was something that we're not to talk about, and he didn't talk about it. And so then one time I was commuting back from Vassar from Poughkeepsie down to Manhattan in order to take a piano lesson with my teacher from high school. And he picked me up, my dad picked me up from the train station, and all of a sudden started telling me everything sequentially. And it was as if I was listening like through a pillow, because I had learned that we're not supposed to be talking about this, but now here you are spilling the goods here, and I don't have a pen to write it all down. And so I tried to listen as closely, but also like listening with my hand, the sensation of my hands over my ears. And then, of course, had questions afterwards, because it was a lot of material and a lot of details. And then would sort of do this tiptoeing act around, sort of like, oh, we're talking about this, and then let me see if I can sort of slip in a question about all this stuff that I have a huge head full of questions, but let me just see if I can sort of like slip something in the midst of this conversation. It was a lot of this kind of, I don't know, it wasn't as open as I'm speaking with you. So, I think that it's not uncommon for children of survivors to tiptoe around their parents' pain, and not necessarily it's bewildering for children. And then as adults, we know more. I certainly did a lot of reading, and then I've always been part of a second generation group, and I'm not the only person who has these experiences with a parent from a survivor parent. But one thing I know is that he was, every ounce of him was for us. I mean, he got into real estate late in his life, and had to take out a mortgage to buy some investment properties, and folded into the mortgage was a purchase of a Steinway Grand for me. So, he just, every ounce of him worked for us. And so it's a different way of feeling love than physical affection. So, if that answers your question, you got a whole mouthful. Hi, mine. She's my grandmother, actually. My grandmother. Well, I think a German Jew assimilating. She married this, my grandfather, and I don't know that her family was particularly religious, and so it probably seemed easier just in the marriage to convert and then be part of the mainstream, I suppose. I don't think that it was out of religious conviction, again. And that's the other thing, is that here we have this, as I mentioned before, we have separation of church and state. So if somebody like me is choosing Judaism, it's not because I'm doing it for a personal reason. I want to identify myself, and faith, it all gets mixed in with that. Whereas it's almost, I wouldn't go so far. I'm tempted to say, like, it's almost like joining a political party. Like, how, because I don't think that they were churchgoers in a regular way. Like my mother was a believing Christian. I don't think she ever missed church on a Sunday. Sorry? Yes, a cultural thing, yeah, for sure. Because after all, everyone at the restaurant, or everyone at the party, or all the friends as they're a young couple, and maybe there are some also assimilated German Jews there in their groups. I don't know that they took religion so seriously as we tend to here. Sorry? Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's special. Yeah, I feel when I look at her face that one of my younger brothers also looks a little bit like her. And yeah, so now in the meantime, I've discovered second cousins, one of whom has a photo. As a matter of fact, actually, I appreciate you being here with me, because one of them has a photo. Then she was one of 4 sisters, 2 of whom were killed in Auschwitz. And my friends here, we were on a trip, and with Ron as well, last January. We were at the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the commemoration ceremony. And so when I was actually able to stand in the barrack where my godmother's brother was killed in Barrack 20. It was especially for medical experiments. So maybe that's why I got sick that day. So, yeah. I mean, it was so emotional to be there, standing there. And then, so if any of you have been to Auschwitz, and if you haven't, then if you can go with a group, I highly recommend it. There's a room that has really the length of the room. It's called the Book of Names. And on either, there's, okay, so here's, let's say, the center, and on either side, this side and this side, are then pages and pages and pages, and the pages aren't this high, they're like maybe from the floor to this here, and of names, and they're all just, I mean, just the name and then where the person was from. So imagine that's, you know, the name is like this, and the book is the size of a room. So, I mean, it's just daunting. I was able to find my great aunt and uncle who were Jewish. My great aunt was my grandmother's sister. I found their names. I also found my godmother's brother's name. So that was also, I don't know, you know, because so much of my time was spent in my imagination with trying to figure out my father, trying to find information and trying to fill in the blanks and, you know, calling international tracing services and trying to find out which camp he was in. And then here at Auschwitz, I had actually like written proof that part of my family had been there and killed there. And I don't know, it gives a little bit of closure in a way to have it to be there in a sense. Because the other thing about it is that my father, in a sense, like didn't talk about it and then and didn't want to talk about it. But whenever my godmother would come over, my godparents would come over for dinner, that's all my godmother would talk about was her brother and all. So, you know, we kids then were extremely curious, you know, like, why isn't my father speaking about his experiences? And so it felt, and I think actually in the initial stages of me presenting this, I think that my siblings also felt sort of a little bit like, well, you're not, like, this is family information, this is a family secret in a way, and what are you doing exposing us? And then after all, like, Dad wasn't really a survivor because, you know, there were different times over here in the United States what a Holocaust survivor meant. Was it somebody from a death camp? Was it somebody with a, you know, a tattoo? And over time, thankfully, the term has kind of widened to include people who actually left Germany, let's say, in the 30s, before let's say in 1938, 39. After all, their lives were completely upended because of the circumstances there. So I felt kind of like more authentic when I saw my family's name there. That that I own this history also. It's not something that I'm making up or trying to make my father into a Holocaust survivor when he wasn't. He was. He was in a forced labor camp. So I don't know, like, how many degrees of trauma one needs to, like, is there a gradation of how many times, your trauma level to then count as authentic of something, So, anyway, good. Oh, so the reason, thanks for bringing that up, because my father, he's sort of like, and we got bicycles, and we got a typewriter. So, right, when you first heard him speaking, and we didn't see him, it wasn't film, he was just speaking, we heard his voice. My niece had done a little bit of an interview with him, and further on in the interview, she said, "What do you mean you got bicycles? How?" And it turns out they stole them. Because it was after they were in the camp. So what kind of resources did they have? But of course, he being now sort of, in the mainstream of society, doesn't want to admit that this proper German guy, stole something. So, but it's, post-war, everyone's stealing stuff. And the reason that the typewriter is funny is because my uncle, you saw my Uncle Dieter, who said, our day was coming. It wasn't, it was just a matter of time. Post-war, he ended up in the typewriter business, so in Augsburg. So that was funny. So yeah, so they must have stolen those things. And I guess the other thing about war is that when, let's say, the Russians are coming and moving further west, an area here is liberated, but over here, where they haven't gotten to yet, there's still fighting going on. So the actual, like the liberation of Auschwitz on January 27th isn't necessarily the end of the war. It comes later, and and there's chaos everywhere. And so they needed to also this kind of under the radar feeling of, very clever about the stationery and then typing a letter to we're on official mission and we need food stamps. So that's what they did with the typewriter, because because it was still where everything was kind of chaotic. The war hadn't ended, and they were trying to get to where the Americans would come. And so with their bicycles, I think that they went through the Alps and found a farm where the farmer exchanged room and board for their physical labor. And I'm sure they didn't arrive and say, guess what? We just came from that forced labor camp over there, and we're on our way to meet the Americans. I'm sure that they did not expose who they were. I think there were refugees all over the place on the roads, trying to get away from the war and the fighting and get to the Americans. So yeah, the typewriter story is a funny one. But it's very clever also, because everything's in Germany was so official. You needed a document for this, a document for that. That's kind of cleverness. So the way fast forward, here he's in the United States. He late in life buys these buildings in Hoboken, New Jersey, for investment, and the Hoboken is notoriously awful for parking. So what does he do? He has a garbage can in the trunk of his car, and whenever he wants a parking spot, he puts it over a fire hydrant, and voila, he's got a parking spot. So I don't think he picked up those skills necessarily in school. So it's kind of this thinking on the spot. And that was something that we as siblings still kind of marvel at, that there wasn't anything that he couldn't somehow or another get around or solve or figure out some kind of a way to. And that's, I think, comes from coming to a new country and making one's way. One has to figure it out, and so. Oh, then that's, wow. So I'm going to repeat this, Manya. Thank you. Wow, that has so many more levels to it. One of the first things that Jews were not allowed to own was typewriters, so they had to hand them in. Radios came under that, then musical instruments. I don't know. So I mean, just sort of like a way of kind of, plundering the Jewish community out of their stuff during stressful times of economically, on so many levels. Whatever. Wow. I can't wait to tell my siblings about the typewriter. Thank you. That's a gift. Thanks. Yes. Yeah. So that's when Jews say, oh, it's a pintel yid or your neshama, that somehow there's some kind of like, somehow a residue of something from the past, somehow a spark inside that we then want to kind of go back to this, or as place of origin in the conversion process. So. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, Ron and Raquel. Thank you very much, really. Thank you.